is really to help people understand how the subconscious and working with the subconscious can really foster a sense of reconnection. I think there's a lot of separateness experienced by many, many people, both from themselves, their communities, and the environment that they're living in. And so exploring the subconscious can really help re-foster that connection, sense of safety, security, and belonging, and really bring them into full vitality with their external world as well.
Aloha, and welcome to Healers' Voices, the podcast that brings you the healing heartbeats of Maui and around the world. I'm your host, Jessica Brazil, and together we embark on a journey to explore the inspiring stories of individuals who are making a profound impact on both local and global levels. From the powerful healing of Maui, we are here to amplify the voices of healers, visionaries, and change makers. We believe in the transformative power of dialogue to chart a future where all life thrives, living in harmony with the natural world and embodying the spirit of aloha. Aloha Noa, welcome to Healers' Voices. Really grateful to have you here and learning more about the human soul, archetypes, symbols, and the psyche. I understand you have a background of working in existential psychology and also have a background of education in the philosophy of comparative religions, understanding of neuroscience, and over 15 years of contemplative practice, and brings this depth of presence and insight into this work. I'm so curious. Welcome. If you'd like to share a little bit more about yourself and how you came into this type of work.
Absolutely. And aloha, Jessica, and mahalo for having me on and get to explore these topics. Very excited. Like you said, I have a background in existential philosophy, comparative religious studies. That was what my undergraduate degree was in. And it's come to really inform and shape the way that I do psychotherapy now. It's been a very interesting progression on how it got there. I didn't think I would ever be a therapist. That was not my agenda for my life. But I'm so glad it took the course that it did, and I'm very excited to explore these influences and talk about the subconscious and how I perform therapy with clients.
Yeah. Well, stepping into this level of work is often, not for the beginner soul. It's like what I like to say, because there's an invitation to go into something deeper and also more expansive and more vast. And I can see where, getting into comparative religious studies or having your own practice may bring up more awareness of all of these archetypes and patterns and expressions in life. And so when you're working with somebody, I'm so curious how you bring in some of your own life experience with dreams and soul messages, how you've worked with that in your own life, and then how that's helped you translate that into how you work with others. Would you share a little bit about that with us as well?
Absolutely. Dreams have been something that have always interested me ever since I was a little kid, and that probably has a lot to do with my mom, and we always had dream dictionaries around the house. And ever since I was very, very young, I would have the most vivid dreams. And I remember so many times just running to my mom the next morning and telling her every detail. And she would always be just so shocked by how much detail I was able to recall. And honestly, though, past that, never took a more in-depth or serious attitude towards dreams until probably getting my master's degree in clinical mental health. I had finished my bachelor's degree in religious studies, and that really acquainted me with symbolism and starting to get in touch with these kind of archetypal characters. And that's really when I started to pay more attention to what my dreams were saying and studying the works of Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, and just really out of simple curiosity, and started to really see profound reflections in my emotional patterns, my relationship patterns, unresolved emotions that I wasn't even aware I was still holding on to. And then putting this into the kind of therapeutic lens, I really started to see a lot of overlap with cognitive behavioral therapy, and looking at thought patterns and core beliefs and these other influences from our lives, and especially as it pertains to things like anxiety, trauma, and depression. So on my regular work that I do just with myself, there's things I do called active imagination, which is kind of a conscious exploration, and allowing the subconscious to kind of filter through, and by being in a relaxed state. um, I write down my dreams, I journal them, I review them over and over, looking for patterns and symbols that are translatable to my life. So I practice what I preach as often as I can, but it also really helps me connect with clients, and helping them kind of step by step. Here's how you can try this. If this doesn't feel like it's a very good connection for you, then we can try these other things. I've made plenty of mistakes, or gotten lost on my own, so it's been very helpful for me to, again, practice what I preach, and be able to share that with my clients too.
Yeah. Can you give an example of what that looks like? Like when a client comes to you, for example, or you have an experience with and are working with somebody that's processing a portal of dream, and what does it look like when you go into the deeper layers of meaning in that, and how does that relate to the soul?
Great questions. Great questions. One client in particular comes to mind, and um, she identified initially as non-binary, and was biologically female. And she came in, and we were talking about identity, and she was really struggling with her sense of self, and dynamics of masculinity and femininity. And one of the dreams that she brought up was a recurring dream. And in the dream, she was dressed in a sundress, very pretty, very floral pattern, very feminine. And there was a masculine figure in the dream that was upset with her. And she was asking this masculine figure to, this is where it gets a little dark. She was asking the masculine figure for help in burying her mother. Now, in the dream, she had never attacked her mother or anything like that. It just picked up with her asking for help. And so we really started to investigate for her, what does this dress mean to you? What are these associations that you have if you picture yourself wearing that dress? And what does this masculine figure mean to you? And through multiple sessions of exploring these symbols, and archetypes, such as the mother, the fact that the mother archetype here is dead, deceased, and she's recruiting this masculine figure to help cover it up. And so what we discovered was, though she was identifying as non-binary at the time, and really living externally in a very masculine presence, she had disconnected entirely from her own internal femininity. And like Jung talks about a lot, is that we all have a balance of masculine and femininity within ourselves. And if we completely sever ties with one of those, then we often experience a lot of psychological turmoil. And so she started acting out, and outward appearance in a little bit more of a feminine way. And we really explored these, so she could have these internal dialogues with her inner feminine and this masculine figure. And we finally came to this resolution that she had been fighting against the image of the feminine because she had turbulent relationship with her own mother, and that she was recruiting the masculine to perform some kind of duty that wasn't really his to perform. It wasn't his responsibility. And so as she navigated these, she really discovered this internal peace, that her struggle really wasn't with her mom, although there was a lot of negative encounters from the past. Her struggles within herself and her own sense of identity. And so as we connect this to the idea of the soul, the most authentic aspect of a person, who we truly are, that's what this connection is really about. And our dreams can be a great way for those authentic pieces that have been, disconnected, severed, or pushed to the side, gives those authentic pieces a chance to reach out and develop resolution, which is, I think, very soul strengthening, very reinforcing of our most authentic versions of ourselves.
That sounds really profound. And to develop that insight. And I'm curious, when you talk about like the sense of peace that was accessed from going through that turmoil, is that often a common experience that somebody can expect when they do this type of processing with dream space? That sometimes there'll be these really turbulent or characters or parts that come up and are met with a lot of turbulence, and then as the decoding and the deep uncovering deeper layers of hidden meaning are discovered, that something else comes through.
Absolutely.
Is that how you know that it's been metabolized? For our listeners who aren't familiar with this type of work, that it's not that you're necessarily telling them what the dream means, but as they dive deeper, they're discovering that there's a sense of homeostasis that will come through when these different archetypes, in this case, there was sounds like a sort of aggressive masculine and a mother figure and feminine part that were all trying to have some exchange, but that the violence was pretty was pretty shocking for this person. And so it took a while to uncover that.
Yeah. That sense of peace, it's almost like the feeling of leaving on a trip for an extended period of time and thrust into this unknown place where it's unfamiliar, you don't know anybody, it's terribly uncomfortable. There's insecurity because you're not sure of how to act or what to do. You don't feel like you fit, and that is very a very universal experience when starting dream work and working with the subconscious. It's very, very uncomfortable at first, but then as you go through this, we can think of this as a in the shape of a circle, or the Ouroboros, which is the snake eating its own tail. And so the start of this journey is very uncomfortable, and it can often be very intense, just like traveling to some place you've never been. But then as you are familiarizing yourself with these things and you start to understand how they operate within you, the confidence starts to come back, the sure-footedness, having the ground beneath your feet. And then the final step, coming all the way, making it full circle, is that sense of returning home, where you're back in the familiar, and there's that sense of peace, that sense of relaxation, of belonging, coupled with a brand new found confidence of, wow, I really have the potential to explore and go out to the unknown and come back with something of deep, profound value. So there's the return home that provides that sense of peace and equanimity, but also with value that wasn't there prior to the experience.
Yeah. It sounds pretty profound to uncover the self in this way. I'm so curious because I hear lots of I like to listen to some of the legends and storytelling around this type of way of viewing the world. A lot of indigenous cultures have different myths and legends and stories, and they all have, profound meaning about the soul and the different archetypes and deities and so on that also are expressed in this, let's call it endless well, right? Wellspring of depths. So perhaps
Yes.
that's where the depth psychology, comes from. So symbols as language too. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit
Yes.
about symbols, like both personal and archetypal. How do these help clients make sense of emotional pain or spiritual longing?
Yeah, another fantastic questions that you're asking. These are wonderful. Um, yes, symbols are a language in and of themselves, and to know a symbol is to know its reference. And this can be challenging in an archetypal sense, because if Carl Jung was correct, and I think that he was an absolutely brilliant observer of the subconscious and recognized these patterns cross-culturally. And so these patterns that kept appearing are essentially what he termed the archetypes. They're these very primal sense of um, figures that we see crop up in, as you mentioned, indigenous beliefs and stories, world mythology. We see them in world religions all the time. Archetypes such as the hero, the great mother, the trickster, et cetera, et cetera. And so if we are disconnected from our sense of our own personal place in a culture, or multiple cultures, then it can be hard to know exactly where the archetype is coming up as. Now, on a more
Mm,
personal level, it can be a little bit easier, because you can start to allow associations to come up for certain symbols in the dream. For example, if I have a dream that I'm in a mountain landscape. I lived for a long time in Colorado and around Pikes Peak area, and so very, very mountainous town. So the associations that come up for me might be beauty and wonder, um, but I also might think of the rocky aspects, and so it might be cold and hard. And so these are personal associations that I can come up with. But on an archetypal sense, the great mountain is often a place of worship, of communication with the divine. And so then I also have to set that piece in the context of the dream as a whole. And so so symbolically speaking, there are these kind of two levels. And this is where my education in comparative religious studies has really, really been of benefit, because I can draw on multiple different religious texts and see, like, oh wow, yeah, the Sermon on the Mount, for instance. But there's plenty, the mountain on which Lord Shiva sits in in Hinduism. These mountains are a place of divine revelation, and they're a place where you place yourself physically on a higher perspective, and we can think of that spiritually as elevating to a higher place. So having some cursory information on religious symbols, mythological symbols, can be helpful, but at the personal and individual level, allowing yourself to let the subconscious bring up associations is really going to be ideal. And I want to make a quick point here on, because I mentioned dream dictionaries earlier. Please stay away from dream dictionaries. Um, they can occasionally be helpful, but so many of them are very, very limited in their explanations, and they make it seem as though every symbol is a very narrow definition. What would be better, if looking for a reference guide, would be, I actually have one of my favorites here, is the Dictionary of Symbols. So this is not a
mm,
dream dictionary, but it's a dictionary of symbols. And this one in particular has a lot of good research with cultural context. So there might be a symbol, and it will define it based on multiple areas of the world and multicultural landscapes. So it's a much more rich affinity that you can identify with if something really pops out to you and says, ah, yes, that's it. That makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just say, living in Hawaii, I was introduced to multiple interpretations of the centipede, for example, as a symbol of um, either the it is a symbol of like a positive and a negative, depending on the cultural context. One was like, here's the psychic, it moves between multiple realms. Here's the jealousy, somebody wants to hurt you, like some kind of harmful totem. And then,
Yes.
another practitioner was like, oh yeah, they have this incredible medicine, antibiotic medicine in there, and can be used in Chinese medicine or some type. I think of it was a Chinese medicine practitioner that told me this. So I guess I'm not positive if she gained that knowledge from Chinese medicine or another path. But that's a good example, right? Of like a symbol. It's not a symbol, it's an actual creature, but it's symbolic of something. So is that an example of how you would lean into symbols with this work?
Absolutely. And that's a great example that hits on a world relevancy. This idea that
Mm-hmm.
the thing that poisons can also heal, and
Yeah.
also the thing that can live in multiple domains will have a dual nature to its symbolic meaning. And so the centipede, obviously, if we see them on the surface of the ground, but they also burrow underneath and into the soil. And so it is a thing that traverses multiple dimensions. And
Yeah.
so, yes, that's an excellent point. This duality of all symbols. Most symbols do have a double-sided meaning. And so paying attention to the emotional aspect of something like the dream will also be a little bit of a compass as to which aspect of the symbol is it going to be positive, is it going to be negative. But yeah, that's a perfect example. So it's a great in terms of
Yeah.
cultural relevancy, and then also at the individual. If you're really grossed out by centipedes, then that's probably going to inform what it's representing to you in the dream too.
Yeah. And so that's why, looking at this type of realm with more curiosity and an openness to the question rather than the answer, doesn't that really shift a pretty big part of our consciousness in our brain that has been taught and educated in schools and throughout, most of our life to look so much at cause and effect, or answers or processes, and getting to an outcome, like getting into the outcome. And yet this practice is more of getting into the journey. And after each question, there's another. And so living in the path of curiosity and observation, and then there always being the and there's more, right? So
Yes,
when you
yes.
mentioned, like getting into the dream book to interpret, I could see where that would be a little bit, um, that could really put a block on the creativity that can really unfold from asking ourselves, what does that mean? What does that mean to me? Which part of me is responding right now? Which one's retracting? What is my body saying? Instead
Yes.
of just our mind. So I'm curious,
Yes.
how do you kind of bring the body with it in this work instead of just the imagination? Are we lighting up and
Mhm.
using the body as a big informer of this as well?
Yes, I love this question, and it's not a question that I have come across in a lot of my readings of depth psychology and dream analysis. But I do think that the body has a hugely important role to play, um, particularly around this idea of intuition. We have our gut feeling. Go with your gut, trust your heart. We say these things as kind of colloquialisms, as just adages that we talk about all the time. And now we happen to know that something like our stomach actually has neurons, just like the brain does. And so science is continuing to show that our body is much more knowledgeable and intuitive than scientists and science-minded individuals have really given it credit for. The way that I think of the body in terms of something like dreams, and I have a good example of this. I had a dream maybe six to 8 months ago, um, that I was following this tour guide. It was kind of an outdoor adventure group, and we were on the kind of border of an old town in Mexico, and I haven't been to Mexico since I was maybe 4 years old, so there's no fresh or recent relevance there. Um, and I noticed as I'm walking with this kind of outdoor group that on my left arm there were somewhere around 13 or 14 gaboon vipers on my arm. And a gaboon viper is a very, very deadly snake. It waits very, very patiently. It has tremendously long fangs. Um, and I think they have the longest fangs actually of any snake. Um,
Hmm.
but they were on my left arm, and it wasn't painful. And I knew that as long as I was careful, everything would be fine. And I had mentioned to the tour guide, I was like, "Hey, are we still okay? Is this gonna kill me?" And I noticed across the street there was a hospital, and he said, "No, you're doing great. Just keep, going about it the way that you are." And in real life, I actually have, I don't know if I have a tattoo of a gaboon viper on my arm,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Mm-hmm.
on my left arm, just like in the dream where these were hanging off of my arm. And so I did a lot of, trying to unpack, what does this snake mean to me? What does my left arm mean to me? And then also looking even more broadly, what is the kind of cultural conception of left-handed individuals? And so all of this played an impact on the way that I saw the dream, how it related to me being left-handed, and really tying this very odd and interesting dream together. But it was hugely influenced by my physical body. And for a lot of other people who have dreams like they can't run, or they're swimming, but they're swimming in slow motion, or they're trying to punch at something, but they can't. This could be physically addressed, as well as psychologically. And Carl Jung was a firm believer that you should act out in your waking life to whatever degree possible what was in the dream. And so if
Hmm.
somebody's having a hard time, defending or fighting someone off, might be worth your, time to go to a boxing gym and throw some punches at a bag. Or if you're having difficulty swimming or running, taking the time to go somewhere and physically engage your body in the same action that was happening in the dream.
Hmm. It's fascinating. Um, so not only if you can recall the dream and there's an invitation to continue progressing with acting out the dream in some way, fashion of some sort. Interesting. Yeah. Besides burying your mother, right?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Physically, maybe symbolically. There can
Right,
be
right.
something that, was
Yes,
inherited from her that can be buried. That is
right.
no longer helpful. So,
Yes.
in terms of like different existential themes and going through different um, chapters, or there are certain milestones that someone might expect in this level of work, we'll call it psychospiritual therapy, are there certain existential themes or mile markers that you tend to see or you tend to navigate with clients when they step into this path? Are there particular symbols, particular archetypes that are, kind of anchors into this type of work to continue to resource in different ways?
I would say it's a little different for everybody, depending on their level of readiness, um, depending on the emotional, psychological work that they've been through, or their frame of mind coming into it. Um, so it's difficult to say, but I will say that one thing I see very commonly is, particularly with my female clients, there's a lot of work that is started with a younger version of themselves, and typically around the anywhere from 6 to, I would say, like 13 years old. And so archetypally, this could be just represented as, the innocent child, or the transition period, the coming of age time frame. And cultures around the world have wonderful rituals of this coming of age for both men and women. And in the West, that's all but been lost. We don't really mark that age. We have kind of the minimal transitory celebration after high school, or something akin to getting your driver's license at 16. But that's not very psychologically profound. It's not very psychologically meaningful. And so this kind of archetype of becoming a woman, becoming a man, or that innocent child who is lost and scared. And so psychologically, we there's a lot of talk around the inner child, and so this kind of would fall into that category. Existentially, it's a necessary step to catch the soul up to the present moment. It's a necessary step to reintegrate and accept something that was so emotionally difficult at that time that it got pushed away for years, sometimes decades. And so that is a very, very common one I see, of needing to integrate and accept a younger form of ourselves, navigating a new or next life transition.
That's that's interesting that you're seeing that more with the feminine than the masculine in your practice. Do you think that that's just a theme of like the feminine kind of reaching for the masculine in supporting her through that um, corrective experience of some sort with the masculine, or do you think men are needing that initiation from men, women from? I'm just really kind of curious about that theme. Is there any kind of, yeah? Maybe you can just tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's partially, I would say that there's a little bit of bias because most of my female clients are more interested in exploring the subconscious and doing dream work and aspects of this. Um, and it largely has to do with, by and large, women have more of a tendency to seek out therapy and have a higher willingness to be vulnerable and emotional. A lot of men, it's changing, which is wonderful. But a lot of men are more resistant to this kind of work. And of course, I'm not talking in broad blanket statements. There's plenty of men who are interested and plenty of women who are like, I'm not talking about my feelings. Um, so I think that's part of it. But I think the roles of the masculine and feminine, from a symbolic perspective, and from an archetypal perspective, also lend itself to a feminine connection to a younger child, whether that younger child is a male, female, or anything. And the masculine archetype is more akin to structures, to the physical landscape. So I do have a lot of my male clients who are interested in dreams tend to be navigating something, tend to have dreams on a landscape that's difficult terrain or difficult to work their way through. There's not quite as much interpersonal relationship coming from the subconscious. It's more object and environment oriented. So I do think that deep archetypal level, we see a little bit of a difference in the nature of those dreams. I will also say that with men, and this is going to sound very Freudian, I have a lot of men who do dream quite a bit about their mothers. And usually it's either very loving and supportive or completely the opposite. And so where I see a lot of women working with a younger version of themselves or this kind of child archetype, I do see a lot of men working with the mother archetype.
Interesting. And so this relationship with the mother-child dynamic, which is such a big role that women play, is in birthing and sustaining life. And then the masculine making peace with, on some level, with the material world and the relationships in the material world, as well as their mother, who may have, they've had a colorful life journey with, who has required some relational capacity in their life, or there is one embedded from their origin, more deeply interdependent, right? Like we are dependent on the womb when, and that relationship forms really early on. So it tends to be stored deep in the psyche. And there's so much opportunity to distract oneself from this incredibly important way of being present with ourselves, right? Is like what's the deeper layers with us versus what's coming at us from the material world or marketing world. You know, it's being sold to us or offered as something that can be what is truly nourishing, right? So when we go into the depths of the soul, there's often an enormous amount of I like to say minerals in the soil of this type of way of being present with ourselves that can be, that we really can't get from any other experience other than taking a deep dive inside into the shadowy realms so we can retrieve more insight and have more clarity, have a bigger capacity in our waking life. So when we talk about depth-oriented therapy, I was just reading this chapter in a book. It's called Psychedelics in the Soul, and it was on the underworld chapter. And it was talking about, descending to the depths, going to the doorway, and there's 7 levels of the doorway just to, descend into the depths. And so when you talk about the snake, I have a relationship with that for a very long time as well. There's, one opportunity of it requiring your presence, right? When we descend into the depths, in order to retrieve, in order to metabolize, in order to even just remember that we're safe, even in terrifying situations that can be terrifying. I'm curious, for those that feel afraid, it's natural to feel afraid, right? To descend into the depths, because sometimes when we go deep inside, we discover some really uncomfortable material. And there's not just one book or workshop or meditation that's going to get somebody to homeostasis, right? We got to descend into the mystery. We got to free dive deep into the ocean. And so how does this really help one in these encounters of going into the depths? I've done this, so I know that it's nourishing. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the nourishment that comes from this place, because it's something you live and breathe and practice.
Yes. You have to break through the darkness in order to find the light. As Jung said, the deeper the roots are to hell, the higher your branches will be to heaven. And so we don't get one without the other. And, you know, this point that you touch on of the material world really infiltrating us and stripping us of what is nourishing. And we talk about these, you know, deeper minerals that can only be found by truly traversing your inner depths. You know, now currently more than any other time in human history, we are inundated, constantly bombarded with the most superficial level of value through social media, Instagram, Facebook, you know, YouTube shorts, TikToks, and our subconscious, and we'll draw on some neuroscience here. Conservative estimates of the power of the subconscious say that it processes data, and this is lowballing, 20,000 times stronger, faster than our conscious mind. So to put that into a little bit of perspective, by the time that you've read one page of a book consciously, your subconscious has read the equivalent of 67 full-length novels worth of information. So
That's
this is,
incredible.
it's unbelievable. And that's a low ball. I've come across some estimates that say it's 500,000 times faster. And so when we're passively scrolling on social media or Instagram or, you know, videos and all these things, we might think consciously we're bypassing, you know, the negative influence. But by the time it first emerges on your screen to you sliding up, that's left an imprint somewhere on the subconscious. And so we end up feeling agitated and on edge after spending hours a day scrolling on our phones and don't really know why. And we don't really address it except for to seek comfort in another way. And so maybe that's food, maybe that's alcohol, maybe that's even more social media. But all of this is just, it compounds over time. And so if we don't take the time to nourish ourselves, to turn towards our own depth, then all we're going to be is informed by millions and millions of unwanted and unfiltered negative influences at the deepest part of our own psychology and the deepest parts of our own soul. And to borrow from the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, you know, the color of our soul is dyed by our thoughts. And so when we are infiltrated at a subconscious level that makes us agitated and irritated, the thoughts that we're going to have throughout the day are going to reflect irritability and agitation. It's going to reflect anxiety. It's going to reflect sadness. And so then that becomes the color of our soul. So doing this kind of deep, deep subconscious exploration, we're fostering a reconnection to our soul, a reconnection to the most authentic parts of what we value, who we see ourselves as, who we want to be, that is uninhibited by all of these external influences that tell you who you should be, how you should be, what you should care about, you know, the cars, the clothes, the money, the influence. So it's stripping all that away. You know, there's a Zen Buddhist who described meditation as you, the individual, are a Christmas tree, and everybody is putting these ornaments on you all the time. And so being able to sit quietly with your own thoughts was the slow process of removing those ornaments off of your tree, which is your authentic self. This kind of inner work, dream analysis, working with the subconscious, paying attention to this is the same process. It's removing those ornaments to reveal how truly unique and beautiful you really are at the individual level. And it's something that I really hope more people take an interest in, because it is absolutely profound when you come out the other side of that with so much more self-confidence, so much less distraction, so much more faith in your life direction and your purpose and your impact on on yourself, on your family, on your friends, on your community, and it extends outwards. It becomes an influence at the global level. So I'm not sure if I completely answered your question or not. Got a little carried away there, but that is what I see as the most nourishing part of this kind of work.
Well, it sounds like you took us to the depths and for a moment there, and then said, well, going to those depths, here is all of the benefits from going that deep. And what it is really facing the shadows that are in ourselves, that are in others, that is in our environment. But it's most important that we make friends with the ones that are inside of us, because they have such important information, such important medicine, they all have a gift, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. And
yeah, that's a perfect way to say that.
some of the teachers that I've met along the way always have said, heaven and hell are seeds of the mind waiting for us to think them into reality. And so when we realize that hell is not a terrifying place, hell is actually really more of living unconsciously and being driven by the unmetabolized demons that are really running the show in the background, because then we haven't settled into our soil of our soul deep enough to really find the nourishment that lies if we just go a little bit farther, a little bit deeper. And then, of course, like it says, the more that those roots deepen, the more nourishment they can receive, and the bigger the tree, the more fruit it can bear, the greater capacity that we have for love, for creativity, for connections. And yeah, you can certainly see that reflected in your life. And really appreciate you sharing that. So yeah, I feel like we're at a great pause point. Is there anything that, you feel like would be helpful to share that might support the closing of this conversation today?
I would just recommend that everybody gives themselves an opportunity to really know themselves. Socrates said an unexamined life is not worth living, and I would say an unexamined life isn't living at all. And so it is scary. It is hard. It's hard to look at our deepest fears and our insecurities. Not so much because we're afraid that what happened to us or what we've been through is going to occur again, but usually because we're afraid that what has happened to us and how we've been treated is what we deserve and how we are supposed to be treated. And so confronting that is terrifying. But if you give yourself that opportunity to go there with compassion and understanding that at the base of all of our fears is the most important aspects of our own personality, and they're so disconnected. Those are parts of us that are afraid, that we have shunned, that we have abandoned. So this kind of work is about deciding to no longer abandon yourself. And if you can do that, and if you accept these scary parts as valid and love them and care for them and welcome them into you, then you will be so blown away by the positive transformation that's able to happen. So just give yourself that opportunity.
And for our, I want to share a quote I recently heard somebody say. They said, if we don't trust and flow in the river of our own life and its gravitational pulls, we end up being a mere tourist in our own river of life. And wow, that definitely rings true for what you just shared, is trusting and taking a dip and a deeper dive into the own river of your own life, because there's something unique there that truly is like a soul print, a fingerprint that just belongs to you. And it's definitely it can be one of the most love-making journeys of one's life. Yeah.
Yes, without question.
And so Yeah. And so you have you have a workshop series coming up at Mindful Living Group. And so participants that are interested in joining that, they can visit mindfullivinggroup.org/events, or just searching mindfullivinggroup.org and clicking on the events page. You have 3 more weekend workshops coming up, and also possibly a weekly group. So for those who are interested in learning more, is there anybody else or any other places that our listeners can learn more about your work? And I know you do one-on-one sessions and you have some groups coming up.
Yes. Yeah, I think the website is the most efficient. Following the Mindful Living Group on social media, right after I talk so poorly about social media, it has wonderful benefits. So yeah, checking it out on Mindful Living Group social media would also be very helpful. But that and the website, I think, would be the easiest and most direct way to get all of that information.
Yeah. And I think a lot of these tools like that, when we use them as tools with intention rather than, the doom scrolling, and we
Yes.
allow them we program them instead of the other way around. It becomes a different experience. And that is certainly part of what, this type of soul level work is where we start learning how to understand, deprogram, and reprogram who we are from a more authentic space. So thank you for modeling the way, Noah, being another model of this level of living. And we look forward to learning more from you. So look forward to having you back again. Thank you.
All right. Mahalo, Jessica.
Thank you for joining us on this transformative journey through the heartbeats of healing. We hope that Healers Voices has filled your heart with inspiration and brought you closer to the spirit of aloha. As we conclude this episode, we invite you to continue this important conversation in your own life. Let these stories and insights resonate within you and inspire change in your own community and beyond. Remember, the power of healing is within all of us, and by working together, we can bring positive change to our world. Let's move forward with compassion, understanding, and a commitment to living in harmony with nature and one another. We'll be back with more incredible stories and voices of healing from Maui and around the world. Until then, please remember to follow and like us to support this continued raising of awareness, and continue practicing, embodying, and spreading the aloha spirit to make a difference in the world. Mahalo for listening to Healers Voices. We'll meet again soon.